Hello, my friends. My name is Ryan Freeman. Welcome to my book review of D.H. Lawrence and Molly Skinner's 1924 novel, The Boy in the Bush. Yes, D.H. Lawrence co-authored The Boy in the Bush with a Western Australian authoress named Molly Skinner. Molly Skinner had approached him with a manuscript that he thought had potential, and the two of them agreed to co-author this book. Now, I'm just going to say right now, I'm not going to spoil everything. I'm going to talk about what this book is about. I'm going to talk about my feelings. I'm going to talk about why I read it and do I recommend it. And let's go ahead and start off with, do I recommend it? All right, let's start off with that part. I recommend it if you are a huge D.H. Lawrence fan like I am. I love D.H. Lawrence. I try to read as much of him as I can get my hands on. And so if you don't mind reading one of his novels that isn't really that great, it's in my opinion not a great novel, but there is some great Lawrence writings in this novel. So if you don't mind mining for gold, because the authors will take you through what I consider to be quite a boring telling of a story. The story itself is quite interesting. The story is about a young man named Jack Grant who is sort of cast away from his family. His mom and dad, they love him, but they don't really understand him and they don't really have time for him. So they send this young man who is coming of age, around the age of 18, 17. They send him to Australia to live with some distant relatives. And the book is about Jack sort of finding himself, discovering himself. Jack is an innocent-looking man, but who carries anger coiled like a serpent inside. Even though he's calm outside, he can strike down his enemies. He has all of this unmolded potential in the beginning of the novel, and then throughout the whole story, through lots of good times. He meets a family that he stays with, the Ellises, that he ends up loving, but also having some issues with, family issues where he becomes attached to them, but also has his heart broken as they die, as things happen, as he gets betrayed by one of the women that he's in love with. And, he goes through this whole saga of his young adult life in Australia. And some of it's at a farmstead with his family, and then he goes off into the bush, the boy in the bush, where he becomes a man. Well, he becomes a wastrel, sort of like a lot of young people, just sort of working here and there, throwing his money away, but having adventures, which are part of how he becomes who he becomes. And then eventually he realizes, hey man, I don't want to take money seriously, but if I don't get a hold of it and make it work for me, I am going to be trapped by the world. It is a story of a young man yearning to escape the world, and Australia, I guess, is still a pretty wild country compared to perhaps England, but nothing quite like it was 100 years ago when this story takes place. And so going out into the bush, away from the settlements, even the settlements in Australia are wild compared to England. He's contrasting it, the people in Australia with England, the way they talk. One of the things that bothered me was there was a lot of accents given to the characters and variant spellings of words to sort of bring you into the accent of the Australian peoples. And I thought a little was fine, but just too much of it just sort of killed me. It was written by two authors, and I don't necessarily know which parts were the parts I liked or didn't like, but I'm pretty sure I liked D.H. Lawrence's parts more towards the end. The story itself, I sort of had to suffer through to get to the gems, and maybe Molly Skinner is responsible for some of those gems as well. I'm not exactly sure. But I So yeah, so it takes place in Australia. It's about a man who's not only finding himself, but he's finding a way to get away from this world, which he doesn't like. He doesn't like tameness. He doesn't like domesticity. He doesn't want to own a house. He finds camping outside to be a much greater way of life than living within four walls. Even when money comes his way, I'm not going to spoil too much. He still doesn't want to, live it up, so to speak. He loves his horse, trusts his horse more than most men. With other men, he may get in a fight. He may murder them. There's some murder in this story. There's babies that die, and when the baby dies, the character says that was good because that baby was weak. It's a rough story. It's a story from 100 years ago, set in the Australian outback. Not all in the outback, but quite a lot of it. And I like reading stories from a long time ago. I like getting into how people thought, how people felt, how people lived. And even though I've sort of criticized the story as not necessarily being particularly well told or my cup of tea, Molly Skinner, sorry. I did enjoy. It did give me an idea of what Australia might have been like back then. Molly Skinner was someone who lived in Australia. Lawrence, I believe, visited Australia. And what it was like back then, and the lawlessness that happened in some of the areas, and the beautiful civility and the dances and all of that. So it's a whole grand story. A lot of beautiful lines. Who would I recommend this story to? Obviously, if you like D.H. Lawrence, he writes a lot about masculinity, about individuality, about death, about courage. Some very beautiful passages. Of course, passages, expressing a viewpoint that is not necessarily politically correct, okay? Lawrence's main character, Jack, has ideas of women, ideas of marriage, ideas of love that you don't necessarily see on Netflix, okay? It's a different way of looking at it. However, when I'm reading it, it's a lot of it is striking quite true to me in some ways, That's why I love reading D.H. Lawrence. But you might also like this book, if you have a wild soul, if you feel that the trappings of civilization, while comfortable, are slowly killing you. Okay, my voice is cracking because I'm just recovering from a flu. That's why I'm sort of doing it at home. Okay, sorry about that. If you have a wild soul, if you have ever felt the need to break out and have adventures and claim your destiny and what principles are needed for that type of life versus the principles or, let's say, moral conventions that you might follow if you were just going to go along with the herd. This is a book for individuals. It is a book for people who have the moral courage, the personal fortitude to say, I don't really care what the world's going to say. I'm going to live my life my way. Okay? But even a strong character like Jack Grant knows that it's not going to be easy, and he'll have to probably go do it in the Never Never Land, or I think he calls it the Never Never Land. It's the far outback, where the world can't really fuck with them, So it's kind of, it's so remote, where I'm living. You can see me. I'm in this massive city, and trapped by concrete all around me. So it was a nice escape. It was a nice reading of Lawrence, and it does make me think about getting out of here. All right, but it is not, in my opinion, a great novel. It is my least favorite D.H. Lawrence novel that I've read to date. However, there is some really great gems of D.H. Lawrence in it. So I definitely recommend it if you're a huge fan of D.H. Lawrence. And that's all I got to say. Please let me know what you think down below. My name's Ryan Freeman. Thank you for coming to this book review of The Boy in the Bush by Molly Skinner and D.H. Lawrence. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.